Let's talk about aesthetic. The aesthetic or look of something are a set of principles underlying or guiding an artist or an artistic movement. Basically, finding or creating your aesthetic is the most important thing you can do as a creative. It's what takes you from being just another random person in the sea of people trying to create to being someone who is truly unique and having that show in your work. Take for example Casey Neistat. He's arguably the person I admire most in this world, and it's just because he's so freaking cool. But what really makes him worth mentioning is how his aesthetic came to be. In an interview about his studio, Casey said, and I quote,
"The tool area looks the way it looks, not because I think it looks cool, but because that's like the height of functionality. And that level of functionality breeds its own aesthetic."
And that functional aesthetic can be seen throughout his entire life. He rolls up one leg of his pants all the time, even in a suit. Yeah, that's pretty cool, but he also rides a bike everywhere and does that so his pants don't get caught in the bike chain. His vlogging setup looks amazing, right? But it's the way it is because it allows for stabilization, better framing, and is very lightweight for everyday carry. His tool rack is pretty cool too. It's pretty much the vertical version of that trend on Instagram where people take pictures of things on tabletops and post them. Well, that's actually called knolling and started as a highly efficient method of organization. On the other end of the spectrum, you have a guy like Mitchell Davis from Live Lava Live, whose aesthetic borders on the unnecessary, but in a good way, I guess. As a kid, he suffered from severe OCD, and as terrible as that is, it is one of the major reasons for his polished aesthetic to his videos today. He has always been on top of the editing game, whether it's an interactive graphic overlay, a transition, or some really weird thing that I don't even understand. He also has a very good eye for color. First off, his thumbnails stand out from pretty much everything else in my feed, and it's not just because he uses the best aspect ratio ever, it's because they just look better. Then you have the videos themselves. Some have one general color palette, and sometimes he does very interesting things with color. Pretty much, regardless of content, his videos are at least always nice to look at. Now let's talk about me and the reason I actually made this video. So I cut my hair a few weeks ago and realized that I didn't feel like myself at all and had no desire to make videos, so I made this video. In a sense, I felt like my aesthetic was ruined before I even got a chance to figure it out. Most of the things I find to be characteristic me stem from a few changes I decided to make back in 2013. Before then, I'd always been a pretty much straight edge kid. And when you're a straight edge kid in a straight edge family and your mother's a teacher, your life is pretty much devoted to academics. For as long as I remember, I always figured I'd just go to primary school, then secondary school, then college, then university, and somewhere along the line I'd figure life out and what I wanted to do. But that didn't exactly work out. I did figure out what I wanted to do, but it wasn't from following the plan. It was from realizing that I wasn't the type of person to follow the plan. I realized that the kind of people who dedicated themselves entirely to school seemed pretty boring to me. They had different opinions, they dressed differently, they talked differently. I just couldn't imagine doing any of the things that they were doing and still being myself. It was around that time that I got my first DSLR and realized that photography, video, and pretty much anything related was a permanent part of my life. That was one part of the change. The other part was going from doing things just because that's what I'd always done and what was the norm, to only really doing things I thought were important. Of course, that changed how I presented myself. I dressed differently, and most importantly, I stopped cutting my hair. You see, up to that point in my life, I'd always had my hair cut flat at least once a month, and I realized that was something I really didn't care about. It was just a waste of time on a Sunday afternoon. Over those 2 years, the perception I had of myself changed from a scrub who had no idea what he was doing to someone who had no idea what he was doing but knew that's exactly what he wanted to be doing with cool hair. And I think only doing what I care about doing, despite all its downfalls, should make for a pretty interesting aesthetic to my videos. If I ever make any videos, if I ever get over the fact that when I look in the mirror all I see is that scrub kid I killed 3 years ago.